Hello, and welcome to this informational recording for the Minnesota Revitalization Grant opportunity for the fall of 2025. My name is Pam Chapman, and I'm the Minnesota Grants Manager for First Children's Finance. Last spring, the Minnesota legislature allocated a small amount of funds for child care facility revitalization grants, but this allocation had to go through an administrative and legal review at the state before it could be sent out to us in a contract. We have that contract as of this week. So rather than hosting an informational webinar, we will post this recording to help open the application portal as quickly as possible. All funds must be dispersed by June 30th, 2026, so there will be a fairly short timeline available for grant implementation and completion. It is our hope that this information will help you have a successful application and, if awarded, grant experience. We hope your facility revitalization grants will continue to ease some of the financial burden you experience when having children in your facilities every day. I would like to introduce you by photo to Gina Porter and Diana Hoffman, who in addition to myself comprise our grants team. As funding has decreased for this program, so has the size of our team accordingly. We look forward to working with you through the application and award process and will gladly help with any questions. We also want to thank you for your patience through the process. I also want to acknowledge our Minnesota Program Director, Suzanne Pearl. Her leadership and work with the Minnesota Legislature and Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families has made the continuation of this grant program possible. The grant team is available to answer questions and help you with your applications by phone at 612-473-6020 or by email at grants@firstchildrensfinance.org. Phones will be answered outside of these hours, but it's most likely that one of us will be able to answer your call between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, as well as 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. on Tuesday, November 18th and Thursday, November 20th. We want applicants to have the opportunity to ask questions when they do not have children in their care, and we will arrange other times by appointment. Full grant guidelines are available on our webpage in English, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. And the grant guidelines really do cover what you most need to know, as well as a comprehensive list of eligible and ineligible uses. We encourage you to contact us particularly for questions not covered in the guidelines or in this webinar or recording, either by email or phone. Again, we're happy to help at any stage in the grant process. We are also committed to reaching as many child care providers in the state as possible for access to this grant program. Interpreter services are available for questions regarding the grant program and for application assistance. As indicated on the previous slide, the times shown on this slide are open office hours when one of us is most likely to be available to answer your call, and we'll arrange another time by appointment. This program began during COVID when the Minnesota legislature allocated American Rescue Plan Act funds, also known as ARPA, to revitalize child care facilities. There was a recognition that child care is an essential service, and maintenance was one of the first things to be put on hold so child care businesses could keep their doors open. Often operating on a very short margin, it tends to be something that gets put off as long as possible anyway, which can put childcare businesses at risk of correction orders or fix-it tickets. We understand that having children every day at a facility, whether it's your home or a dedicated childcare facility, can take a toll, and facilities need revitalization. Since this program began in 2022, we have awarded more than 3,300 facility revitalization grants. This fall, we have approximately $700,000 to award, which we anticipate will mean approximately 70 grant awards. Any eligible applicant may apply regardless of past grant awards. The preference will be given to those who have not previously received large awards, particularly in the case of a tied score. When this program began, there were a few key goals. We know that more childcare providers are leaving the business each year than are entering the industry, so these grants are intended as a means of support to help stabilize childcare in Minnesota, hoping that it will encourage providers to continue to provide care for children other than your own for a longer period of time. There is particular concern about increasing childcare in the areas of the state that are considered childcare deserts, where truly there are no childcare options for families within the community. Other items we are asked to track are the number of childcare applicants providing care to high needs children and whether or not a grant will help a childcare provider maintain the enrollment they have, or if it will enable them to add slots and serve additional children. We will look at these closer in following slides. With these goals and funding limitations in mind, please include items or projects that you need to have rather than items or projects that would be nice to have. As noted, with a comparatively small amount of money to distribute compared to past grants, if you decide to apply, please be certain that what you request can be complete by May 15th, 2026, as it's likely that for every grant we award, at least 4 or 5 will be declined. We want to see the dollars fully utilized, but this is a tight timeline. Grant award notification is likely to take place in mid-January, and final reports will be due on May 15th, 2026. This will allow approximately 4 months for project completion. The application portal will open at 9 a.m. on Friday, November 14th, and will close the following Friday at 4:59 p.m. We say 4:59 p.m. because the portal will shut down and be closed for further submissions as soon as the computer clock turns over to 5 p.m. As you can see, virtually all childcare providers in Minnesota are eligible to apply, though award maximum limits vary by type. All facilities and providers must be located within Minnesota, and $100 is the minimum grant size. Licensed family childcare providers may apply for up to $15,000. Licensed childcare centers, either for-profit or nonprofit, can apply for up to $20,000. A certified center may apply for up to $10,000, and a legally non-licensed provider who is registered for the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP, may apply for up to $500, as this is intended for health and safety needs. Certified childcare centers have a lower maximum grant award than licensed centers because they often have access to other public funds that licensed childcare providers do not have. Under very limited circumstances, a new childcare provider seeking licensure may apply if an unexpected facility need is identified during a regulatory authority's final walkthrough and is the final barrier to licensure. This means that all requirements identified in Rules 2 or 3 must have been met already. Documentation of a cleared background study and written documentation from the regulatory authority from their walkthrough is required. If you are a startup provider, we strongly recommend that you contact us to discuss your possible application request before you submit your application so we can determine if it is eligible. The license also must be secured by the time that the report deadline comes up. Also, please note that only one application may be submitted in this grant round per license. If more than one application is received for the same license, both applications will be disqualified. If you need to add something after you submit your application, you can contact us to request that your application be opened for editing as long as sufficient time remains in the application period. No information will be accepted after the grant portal closes on November 21st. We ask for a priority list in the application, and this may be used to grant partial awards depending upon eligibility of requests and availability of funds. When applying, please do use actual costs, do not round up. Awarding actual costs will allow us to maximize the funds and award as many grants as possible. There's another limitation on eligibility when a sectarian organization holds the license for a child care program. Sectarian is defined as that which has the purpose or function of advancing or propagating a religious belief. Sectarian organizations are examples are a church, a synagogue, a parochial school, a temple, or a mosque. If one of these types of organizations holds the license, it is considered sectarian for grant purposes. It doesn't matter whether or not you use a religious programming or curriculum. If the license is held by the sectarian organization, these restrictions will apply. When an individual rents space in a church, synagogue, parochial school, temple, or mosque, and is otherwise unaffiliated with the property owner, that program is not considered sectarian. Sectarian organizations can apply, but they are limited to the health and safety needs of children only. Families with high needs children often have a particularly difficult time finding childcare, and it's one of the things we need to include in our aggregated reports to the state. We ask, therefore, whether or not a child care business currently is serving high needs children, and a child should be counted as high needs if they are living in a low-income family, which is defined as at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, or FPG. And we realize that you may not know this about your families. However, we see most of the reporting when a child care can be defined as needing special assistance or support, including children with a diagnosed disability, a developmental delay, English is not their first or primary language, they reside on Indian lands, any of the state's tribal reservation lands, families are migrant or homeless, or a child is in foster care. If you are uncertain of whether or not a child in your care may be considered a high needs child in need of special assistance or support, please call us. We're happy to help. Another thing we've been measuring since the initial facility revitalization grant program began is whether or not these improvements allow an increase in childcare slots throughout Minnesota and or how many slots will be preserved. Adding means that because of the facility revitalization improvements, you will be able to add or increase the number of children you care for, either by increasing your enrollment up to your license capacity, or perhaps even increasing your license capacity. Similarly, you may already be at your full license capacity, but you need some facility improvements to maintain your current enrollment. Both of these can be good. So as you consider this question, please know that if your enrollment is already at capacity, we understand there's not the option or ability to add slots. However, if you're not at your license capacity and the grant funding could make a difference for your program's potential expansion, even if it's only by adding one more child, please let us know that. Similarly, there's a question in the application about adding or preserving childcare jobs. Childcare is a key component to economic development and a stable working economy, so this is also an objective of the program. Please indicate if you have plans following this grant to add employees or paid helpers. Applications will be evaluated using an award rubric with a numeric rating assigned in the following categories: whether or not the request is needed for licensing or for it's a health and safety need, whether childcare slots or jobs are created or preserved, the access equity area score as determined by DCYF based on census tract, whether or not high need children and families are served, the number of sites owned and operated by the provider, and the overall purpose and request. Every effort will be made to balance grant allocations by geography, provider type, and demographics of the communities served. The state has requested that applicants not contact their licensor for a recommendation. Please provide documentation from your licensor only if they indicated that something will need to be fixed prior to their next visit. We do factor in documentation from a regulatory authority, but please know that we won't be able to turn grants around fast enough for a corrections order or fix a ticket. We understand that cash flow for facility projects can be very difficult for many childcare businesses. To make the program as equitable as possible, we distribute 90% of the grants up front, with up to the remaining 10% held back to be paid on a reimbursement basis once the funds are spent and receipts are submitted with the final report. This is different from the regional grants, for example, which are paid entirely on a reimbursement basis. Projects do need to be complete and paid in full when the final report is submitted, so businesses will need to pay that 10% of the cost and wait for reimbursement of that amount. It's not okay to ask your contractor for a project to wait for the final 10%. That needs to be paid in full. With a reasonably small amount of grants in this next round, however, we do believe that turnaround time for the report reconciliation and reimbursement payment will be fairly quick. Now, let's talk a bit about eligible uses. If you're familiar with how this program was originally offered, there has been a fairly significant change in the last couple of years. Major renovation is still not allowed, but that definition at the federal level changed. So it's worth looking at the guidelines on the webpage to see if your request will be eligible. Because of the time of year that projects or purchases will need to be made, awards will be limited to indoor work or projects only. We really want to see these funds fully used, and we'd rather not have to invoice for return of funds. So please do your best to ensure that your project or purchase can be complete by May 15. We will be considering projects in the categories shown on this slide. And there is an alphabetical list of eligible uses in our grant guidelines found on our webpage. So I won't review eligible uses in detail here. I just ask that please do look up the item or project you want to request to be certain that it can be considered, including if you have applied before. The list may look different now. If you don't see what you're looking for in the eligible uses list, call our helpline or send us an email. Our contact information will be shared again at the end of this recording. While we are only considering indoor projects, most windows and doors can be replaced from the inside of a facility. Therefore, we are considering replacement of exterior windows or doors, but as ordering a custom size window or door can take a while, we are requiring documentation in the application that any project involving a window or door can be completed by May 15th, 2026. That will be a very important conversation to have with your supplier and or installer. And keeping in mind that you won't be able to place an order until at least mid-January. Another thing to note, major appliances can be purchased or replaced, but the grant will pay for 50% if your childcare is in a shared space, either in a home or a facility shared with another business. The grant will pay 100% of a major appliance only if the childcare program is in a dedicated childcare facility with no other tenants, owner, or residents. I also want to mention, if you are leasing your space, we encourage you to make sure that the terms of your lease are secure for at least 2 years beyond the grant period, or that you predetermine with your property owner some arrangement regarding repayment of the grant should the owner decide to sell in less than 2 years because the property value has increased and you end up being evicted following the sale. You're still required to provide care for children other than your own for 2 years after grant implementation. And if what the grant paid for cannot move with you, for instance, if you made actual property improvements, you would face having to repay at least a portion of the grant. And a property owner who would sell the property after you paid to improve it probably wouldn't reimburse you for the grant amount. As with eligible uses, ineligible uses are identified in the grant guidelines document, but a few categories that are ineligible include any exterior or outdoor project, anything that would be considered a program expense. Some examples might include indoor gym or play equipment, security or monitoring equipment, food service or single-use items, and things related to transportation, including car seats, wagons, strollers, bikes, that type of thing. Things that are considered a business expense, so services, professional or administrative fees, operating expenses like rent, mortgage, utilities, safes of any kind, including a business safe or a gun safe, service fees, plans, or warranties of any kind are also not eligible. Grant writing fees are not eligible, and please know that you do not need a grant writer to complete this application. If you need help, call our helpline. When labor is provided by the grant recipient, their immediate family members, a significant other, or anyone living with them, or their employees of the facility or the licensed entity, parts and materials only can be covered. Labor cannot be paid in those cases. Just another note on labor: to be covered under this grant, documentation of hired labor must include the contractor or business name, address, and direct contact information, especially a phone number. The laborer's business information must be verifiable, and the vendor store information must be presented with your item costs in the case of purchased items. Prior purchases or anything for which money has been paid prior to receipt of a grant award and the return of a signed grant agreement is not eligible. Whether you call it a down payment, a price lock, a fee to hold a place in line with a contractor, any prior purchase or any contract signed, even if no money changes hands, prior to the date of the signed grant agreement, will disqualify that item or service from the grant. Anything with another public funding source would be ineligible. This means if you have another grant, say perhaps a regional grant to paint the walls of your facility, you can't request that this grant also be awarded to paint the walls. Some projects are large, and a facility revitalization grant may pay for only a portion. We do not place any limitations on using this grant as a matching grant or pairing it with other grant opportunities, but other funders may have those types of stipulations. So we encourage you to check with each funding source for their requirements and stipulations if you do have more than one funding source to complete your intended projects. I want to share an overview of what is required after you receive a grant. If you are awarded a grant, there are terms that you will need to review, understand, and accept. And to be clear, grants are not free money. There are strings attached. The funding source is public tax dollars, and as previously mentioned, the state of Minnesota expects 2 years of childcare to be provided for children other than your own in return for this investment in your business. In order to do that, you must ensure that you remain licensed in good standing, or if you are legally non-licensed, registered with CCAP, that you maintain your registration with CCAP. If you close your business early, or if something happens and your license is revoked, or for legally non-licensed, you're no longer registered with CCAP, before the 2 years is up, you will be invoiced for a return of a prorated share of the grant. Next, pay close attention to your award letter. Your grant may not include everything you requested in your application, and you need to be certain that you are using grant funds only on what was approved. You'll need to submit a final report with receipts and photo documentation by May 15th, 2026. And the photos must show that items are unpacked, assembled, and in use in your facility, or that your project is complete. If your items are on sale and it doesn't take the full 90% that you received up front to purchase the items you're awarded, know that the extra funds are not yours to keep. You will need to return the funds not used for approved purposes. Likewise, if you don't return a report with receipts and photos, you will be invoiced for return of the full 90%. If you close your business prior to 2 years after returning your signed grant agreement, you will be invoiced for a prorated portion of the grant funds received. If you do not pay the invoice, you would be reported to DCYF as non-compliant. And while you might not care about eligibility for public funding relating to childcare any longer, if you close your business, the state does consider this fraudulent use of tax dollars, and DCYF can refer you to the Department of Revenue for a lien on your taxes, and or to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension for a criminal fraud investigation. After your report is received, we will reconcile your receipts and photo documentation compared to the grant award. With proper documentation, you can be reimbursed for up to that final 10% of the grant award. If your application is denied, you will be notified at the same time as the award notifications go out via email. Examples of why an application may not be approved for funding include a prior grant was reported as non-compliant, or an FCF loan has been written off in default. Your request was not eligible or did not meet grant guidelines. The application was missing required documentation, or what will be true in most cases, the application simply did not score high enough for funding compared with other applications received. Grant notification will be sent via email from the grant portal and will be sent to the email address you use to sign up for our online grant portal account, which is called Submittable. This email will be used for all communication from FCF. If you receive a grant award, you will be given 1 week to return a form that includes a grant agreement, an IRS Form W-9, and an ACH form for bank account information if you want a direct deposit rather than a check. Please note that bank accounts are verified by Bill.com, which is what we use to process payments. If you've never received an electronic payment from First Children's Finance to the account you provide, you will see a penny deposited into your account first, maybe a week or two prior to the actual grant deposit. This is how the system verifies bank accounts. And if we're not able to verify the bank account, or if you don't have an account, a check will be sent via US mail. Please note that these payments by check take longer to process in addition to mail time, so you will not receive payment as quickly as with an ACH transfer. The ACH transfer is considered the safest form of payment. All grant payments will be made in 2026, and if you receive $600 or more from FCF in the calendar year and you are not a tax-exempt corporation, you will receive a 1099, as grants are considered reportable income. Grantees should work with their tax advisors on how to calculate eligible business expense deductions when reporting the grant to the IRS for tax purposes. As previously mentioned, final reports will be due on or before May 15th, regardless of the notification date. Options for extensions are very limited, as all funds, including the final 10%, must be distributed prior to June 30th, and we need time to reconcile your report as well. If you come up against a supply chain delay or a very small project delay, a limited extension might be possible for perhaps up to 2 weeks, but extensions are not guaranteed, and we strongly recommend that you make your purchases or begin your project as soon as you return your grant agreement. With regard to the report, in addition to a few brief questions, paid in full receipts that match the items or projects approved in your award letter are required, as are before and after photos that show any purchases have been received, are unpacked, assembled, in use in your program, and that your project is complete. If you add before photos in your application, you won't need to add them in the before photos again in your report, which may be a little added incentive to add them to your application. Reimbursement of up to the final 10% of the grant award will not be made until the final report is received and reconciled. We will compare the receipts with the grant award and deduct any portion that is ineligible, such as warranties or service plans. When approved receipts are equal to or greater than the full grant award, the full 10% will be reimbursed. If approved receipts are greater than the 90% received, but less than the full award, we will adjust the reimbursement accordingly. If the total approved receipts are less than the 90% received up front, we will invoice for the difference. Failure to submit the final report will not only result in no reimbursement, but the grantee will be invoiced for return of grant funds. And if the funds are not returned, the grantee will be reported to DCYF, which may impact the provider's childcare license and/or other payments of public funds. While this has already been mentioned, it is something that bears repeating because there are some pretty serious consequences for not meeting the terms outlined in the grant agreement. When a report of noncompliance is made to the Department of Children, Families, and Learning, It may result in discontinuation of future payments, including 10% withheld for reimbursement of this grant, recoupment of payments already made, including some or all of the 90% paid up front, and or additional action related to the funds and the provider license under Minnesota statutes, chapters 119B, 245A, 245E, and Minnesota statutes, section 245.095. Additionally, you may be ineligible for other public programs and or funding, which may include licensing action. Your license could be sanctioned, suspended, or revoked. Parent aware ratings could be revoked, or you could be excluded from seeking a rating. And funds, including but not limited to the Great Start compensation payments, parent aware grants, teach scholarships, retain bonuses, regional grants, CCAP payments, and future FCF funding, both grants and loans would be at risk. Again, we understand that if you close your business, you may not care about any of that, but DCYF may refer the non-compliant report to another agency, resulting in a tax lien or fraud investigation through the BCA. Closing your business does not allow you to step away from the grant requirements. Since these are public funds, First Children's Finance is required to comply with the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, Minnesota chapters 13.599. So when a grant application is submitted, the following is considered public data: name, address, license, number, age of children served, award amount, if any, and identity of the grant reviewers. Requests for this information are referred to the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and then they request the information from us. Applications will not be discussed outside of First Children's Finance employees, board of directors, or external advisory group members comprised of key stakeholders or partners. What you request and why is not public information, so you do not have to worry about what documentation you provide in your application, because your licensor is not going to see your application. It is in your best interest to paint a picture of your situation. Try to imagine your request through the eyes of someone who has never seen your facility, and build the strongest case you can for funding your application. As I told one applicant who in an early round simply said that she desperately needed new windows and then called to find out why she was declined. She was terrified that her licensor would see her application and would immediately issue a fix-it ticket, and she didn't have the money to replace the windows on her own. I explained that the application will not be shared with the licensor, so you can feel confident in fully explaining your need without the worry that it will somehow prompt any kind of sanction, correction order, or fix-it ticket. We do compile information overall as a group for statistical reporting to DCYF and impact reporting to the Minnesota State Legislature. The demographic questions asked in the application and report are items we are required to report aggregately to DCYF. The only time individual provider information is released outside of First Children's Finance is when we have to report a grant to the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families as non-compliant, or when cooperating a legal investigation and directed to do so by DCYF. As I mentioned, we use an online grant portal system called Submittable at submittable.com. Applications, the link can be accessed on our webpage, which is www.firstchildrensfinance.org/4-businesses/Minnesota-grants. If technology is a barrier, we can scribe applications for you by phone using your email address to help you set up a Submittable account. Email is also possible, but we need to receive all documentation at least 24 hours prior to the grant application deadline so we can enter it into the system for you. If we receive more requests for applying by phone or email than we can accommodate, we will do so or what we can on a first come, first served basis. The grant portal shuts down for us at 5 p.m. on the last day as well, so we can't guarantee that we will be able to scribe an application depending upon when we receive it. Requests for assistance by phone should be made as early as possible in the open application period. Providers with more than one setting may submit multiple applications, and each application will be evaluated separately. The application must be signed by the owner of the childcare business, even if it's completed by another individual, and electronic signatures will be accepted. Grants are not awarded on a first come, first served basis. Applications will be reviewed and awarded on a competitive basis, and as previously stated, we anticipate awarding approximately 70 grants with available funds. Have your bids and quotes ready, and please, if you're hiring labor, know when the contractor is available to get the project done and plan accordingly, especially since you won't be able to put any money down and hold a spot for spring. Because only 4 months are available for project completion, this round may actually be ideal for purchases. If you are hiring labor for any part of your request, please be sure that it can be complete by May. Applications are submitted through our online portal using any computer, tablet, or smartphone, and each application may cover only one licensed, certified, or legally non-licensed site. All prior FCF grant reports, including for the Minnesota Access to Technology grants, must have been submitted and reconciled prior to this application. All invoices due to FCF must be paid in full in order to be eligible to apply for grant funding, and any past funding cannot have been reported to DCYF as non-compliant. Budget documentation is required. A quote or an estimate is one method, and that is required for paid labor. It has to include the business name, contact information, an itemized scope of work, and costs by line item. You could submit a screenshot for purchases, including the store vendor name, the web address, model, item description, and price. Or you can type out a detailed list, including vendor, contact information, model, item description, quantity, and price. Once you have a grant award, we will be looking for completion of the project or purchase of the item listed in the approved award. We will not be comparing brands or models. If you are approved for a new washing machine, for instance, but you find another model at a different store that will work better for you or fits better within the grant award, by all means, purchase the other model. In this instance, we will be looking for purchase and installation of a washing machine only. Keep in mind that any unspent grant funds will need to be returned to FCF at the time of grant reconciliation. If you upload a quote for paid labor and then decide to complete the work yourself to save money, you won't be able to keep the money saved or spend it on anything else that is not approved. So please do keep that in mind as you implement a grant award. If you have unspent funds, you may request a modification in writing to use toward another eligible expense, but the modification must be approved in writing prior to spending, and modifications are not guaranteed. Do not make any financial commitment prior to a grant award. If you do, that will disqualify the application and award if the receipts are dated prior to the grant agreement date. Do not pay in cash. Receipt documentation is required in reports that can be audited. So we can use something like the front and back of a canceled check, or if the amount paid on a credit card exactly matches the an estimate or quote uploaded by a vendor, and you use that vendor, the amount is the same. We can use, the combination of the two, but we can't track cash. Ask your contractors for itemized quotes and estimates, and make sure it's clear that it is an estimate and not an invoice. Your grant application may be declined if your estimate appears to be an invoice, which would make us think that it's an ineligible prior purchase. So getting started with technology, you'll want to create an account in Submittable. use the email that you check most often. And when logging into Submittable, it's best to either use Google Chrome, Firefox, or Safari as an internet browser, as currently Microsoft Edge is not supported. It's very easy to sign up for a Submittable account, as shown on this screen. All you need is your email address, first and last name, and you will create a password. Please remember your password, as you will need to go back into Submittable to complete your final report if you receive an award. And while messages are sent to the email you use for your Submittable account, there is a messages tab in the portal where you can always go back to view communication from us. As you can see, unless you know that you use the email account associated with your Google or Facebook access, we recommend that you do not use those options. I know many people no longer check the email accounts they used to originally sign up for Facebook or Google, and therefore they're not going to get communication from us if they use one of those options. Once in the application, you can save a draft of your work anytime by scrolling to the bottom of the application and clicking Save a Draft. Once you submit your application in Submittable, you'll no longer be able to make changes unless you contact us and request that your application be opened for edits, after which you will need to resubmit the application. We will follow up with your submission by email through the Submittable grant portal, so please be sure to safe list notification emails from Submittable and check the email you use to sign up for your Submittable account regularly. If you would like to see what the application looks like in Submittable, I will switch over to the application and show you a preview. But before that, however, as promised, here is our contact information once again. Unless you've started working with one of us and want to continue with additional questions, your best option is to call our general helpline at 612-473-6020, or our general email is grants@firstchildrensfinance.org, as the next person available can then address your questions. I will now switch over to the grant portal so you can see a preview of the application. But for now, I thank you for listening to this recording. And here is the application. As you can see, the grant guidelines are included, a link to the application, so you can go back and check eligible uses or any portion of the grant guidelines at any time. Please note that grant review can take 6 to 8 weeks following the end of the application period. Final reports will be due May 15th. No down payments, prior purchases, price locks, signed contracts, or commitments can be made. Multiple applications submitted for the same license will disqualify both. And applications are due by 4:59 p.m. on Friday, November 21st, 2025. We put this reminder several times throughout the application that if you need to step away from your application, you can save it and come back to it at any time, but you will want to save it at the bottom of the screen and before you walk away, because it can time out if you don't do that. We ask for basic provider information, provider status, provider type. I'll just select one option here. If you're an existing childcare provider, we ask for your license and your license number only as it appears in the license lookup site. If you're licensed by a tribal government, we ask which tribe. And if your license is held by a sectarian organization, it gives you a reminder that you can ask for needs for health and safety of the children only. Provider type, For a nonprofit or a certified center, this will bring up a prompt for the name of the licensed entity, the child care director, and the licensed entity executive, which could be a superintendent, board chair, president, CEO, executive director, senior pastor of a parochial school, something like that. If you're a family provider, you're just going to be entering your own information. And for a for-profit center, the center owner information will be requested first. And if there's also a director, we'll ask for that information as well. We ask for your address and if the mailing address is used for tax purposes, if the location is shared by either your family or another organization. We ask how many childcare sites and licenses you own and operate. We ask here if you have previously received a facility revitalization grant or a Minnesota Access to Technology grant, basically just to give the reminder that all open invoices for prior grants must be paid prior to submitting this application. And if you have an open Minnesota Access to Technology grant, the report needs to have been submitted and reconciled prior to November 21st. We ask for your license capacity, the status of your property, if you own it or lease it, if you, when you have an opening, if you accept families with the Child Care Assistance Program. This does not refer to your current enrollment only. Then we ask about provider demographics and gender identity and the demographics of the children in your program, total number enrolled, and the total number by age group and high needs by age group. Then for narrative questions, we ask, what are your facility revitalization needs? Please outline your intended project and describe how you would use a grant, why the project is necessary for your business. For instance, is it required for licensing? Is it a health and safety need? And if so, why? What will happen if you do not receive a grant for financial assistance for this need? If you receive a grant, will you add or preserve your enrollment? Same with jobs. Then we ask what the top priority, the most needed facility revitalization request is. And if you're submitting multiple items for consideration, to please add a priority list below. If the grant will not pay for the entire project, we ask that you identify what additional financial resources will be used to complete your facility project. This question does not in any way impact your score. We just want to make sure that if the project costs exceed a facility grant, that you will be able to complete it, that you have resources, whatever they may be, to complete your projects. Pictures are strongly recommended to help support the need or reason for your request, and you can upload up to 25 files of pictures. Zip files are not supported, just so you know that. And again, before and after pictures are required in the final report, and if before photos are included here, they don't have to be uploaded in the report. A place for your total grant request. We ask if sales tax is being requested. If it is, we ask, is the sales tax shown on all of your budget documentation? If it is, great. If not, we ask you to add the sales tax rate or rates for all of the items you're requesting. There are several budget items that we ask that you read, that you select all applicable categories of expenses. Do not round to the nearest dollar. Attach corresponding vendor bids or quotes, those are required for paid labor. For equipment and supplies, you may list the item number, description, and pricing from your intended seller or source, along with the seller's business name, web address, or address and phone. Items or projects for which a down payment, a price lock, a fee for price protection, any prior commitment whatsoever are ineligible. Incomplete or insufficient budgets and or insufficient documentation will not be considered. Eligible and ineligible uses, again, are available in the grant guidelines that are linked in the application. And the anticipated availability of product or labor should be verified prior to the application, since you'll only have 4 months to complete your project once grant award notification has been made. We ask you to check that, yes, you have read those instructions, and then select any box for which an item fits in that category. If you're getting appliances, you can check that. If you are asking for a bathroom renovation, for instance, and you might be asking for fresh paint on the walls, a new vanity, toilet, and flooring, you can put it all under bathroom. You don't need to split it up and list the flooring separate here. You can, but one category is fine. We have tips for you below the detailed description and quantity needed for each item boxes. Those are meant to be helpful, so please do read those. If you have some indoor renovation, kitchen, bathroom, interior work to do, we do ask if paint, wall or ceiling repair or flooring is requested, that you provide the square footage in the space below. And if flooring or paint is not being requested, you can just put 0 or NA. How you would like to document your budget requests. You have 3 options here. You can upload that quote that we've talked about, a screenshot or photo of the item, including all of the information listed here, or provide a detailed list of the items to be purchased. And if you select that item, you do get a line for each item that we need, each type of information. To upload a quote, you can upload up to 25 files. Again, uploading the screenshot or photo gives you an opportunity to upload upwards of 25 files. If you are typing out a list, you can select that you want to add another budget item for budget documentation. You can keep going until you've listed everything. And then if you're awarded a grant, what additional eligible items might you need beyond what you are requesting? We ask this question for 2 reasons. One, it helps us understand what types of facility revitalization needs are still out there. And because purchases can be found on sale, it might result in unspent grant funds. And if you're awarded a grant and have funds remaining, you may submit a modification request for items that are included in this question or elsewhere in your application. A modification request must be submitted and approved prior to purchase of the items requested in the modification, and it needs to be done before your final report is due. Without an approved modification, underspent grant awards will be invoiced for return of unused funds. Then we have the attestation, grant agreement, and signature. This will look very similar if you receive a grant. It will Similar language will be in the grant agreement, but it's important that you understand what you're agreeing to. You're indicating that you have not and will not purchase any item or service in the application, that you won't place a down payment, and you won't sign any contract prior to receiving a grant award and returning a grant agreement. You're signing that you are eligible and that you actively provide care to children ranging in age from birth to age 10, that you're currently licensed and or registered with CCAP if you're an LNL. Your site must have no negative actions, meaning that you are actively approved to care for children. Licensing violations, including temporary immediate suspension, revocation, will impact your grant. You'll either not be awarded a grant, or if you have one, you could be invoiced for return of grant funds on a prorated basis. If you're licensed by a tribe, you must be in good standing with the licensing tribe. And then if you're seeking a childcare license, that you've provided your background study and the items are limited to what was identified in the final pre-licensure walkthrough. That you've read and understand the following, that upon acceptance, 90% of the grant award will be received, and that can take up to 30 days beyond the signed grant agreement deadline. Acceptance documents must be completed and submitted before the deadline to receive payment. Once awarded projects and purchases are completed, that you'll submit a final report showing paid in full receipts with no balances due. The final report will be reconciled with submitted receipts matching the awarded items. And that if anything is found to be not in alignment with the grant award, that an invoice will be issued for return of unused or disallowed funds. That the funds must be spent exactly as described in the award letter. And if any modification is required, that you will submit a written request prior to alternative spending. And if that approval is not obtained, the funding in question must be returned. And that by accepting a grant award, that you are agreeing to provide licensed or licensed exempt care in Minnesota, caring for children other than your own for a minimum of 2 years following the grant implementation, and beyond submitting the grant agreement. If the program closes before the 2-year period, you understand that you're required to repay a prorated amount of the grant award. And if you move your program within those 2 years, any item or project not moving with your program will be invoiced a prorated share. There's some additional things that we've already covered, that you're not going to use the funds to pay yourself or family members, your employees. You're going to remain licensed in good standing. You'll make child care services available to families regardless of race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, disability, public assistance, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, or familial status. You'll participate in requested surveys and report forms related to the grant award. You'll submit a final report within 4 months, and including expense documentation, and that you'll repay funds to First Children's Finance or refuse reimbursement as a result, granted for any costs that grant administrators identify that do not match the original description in the approved funding award. That you'll return any unused or disallowed funds to First Children's Finance. There's a place for signature. You can check boxes if you're interested in any of the other services offered by First Children's Finance, and you'll submit the application. And that is really all there is to it. Again, happy to help if you have questions. 612-473-6020, grants@firstchildrensfinance.org. Thank you for listening.